Saito and Akane have been at each other's throats for as long as they've known each other, and on this particular day, Akane is yelling at him for some reason. But Saito couldn't care less and tells her to leave him alone. That just leads to an even bigger argument. One of Akane's friends, Himari, comes over and she finds it funny how they're always fighting. But now that she thinks about it, Akane seems to care way too much about what Saito does, so she's starting to wonder if there's something going on between the two of them. Akane is disgusted and denies having any feelings for Saito, because she'd much rather have a roach crawl into her ear and go out with him. And Saito is equally offended by the idea of dating someone like her, so they start arguing some more. Once the school day is over, Saito is on his way back home, but all of a sudden he gets a phone call from his grandpa. He answers, and his grandpa invites him to come have some tea with him at his house, but Saito has better things to do, so he's not interested in going on a tea date with his grandpa. Grandpa reminds him that he already made Saito the heir to his company, so the least he could do is spend some time with his dear old Pop while he's still alive. But even if Saito still doesn't want to, Grandpa knows a thing or two about kidnapping children, so he has a limo and some of his armed guards pull up beside Saito. Saito briefly considers running out to there like a track star, but then he realizes his grandpa is definitely crazy enough to have him shot and sent to the hospital, so he decides to comply. He gets into limo, and while the guards are driving him, he asks where he is being taken. The guards are apologetic because they know their boss is being unreasonable, so he tells him that they were instructed to bring Saito to a villa, but they don't know what Saito's grandpa is planning. Saito's grandpa, Tenryu Hojo, once saved the Hojo group from the brink of collapse. And under his leadership, the Hojo group became a global high-tech corporation, so it isn't a stretch to say that he's one of the richest and most powerful people in the world. And it may be hard to believe, but Saito's grandpa cares about his grandson more than anything, but Saito's father, on the other hand, seems to care a lot more about milk. Eventually they arrive at the house, so Saito sits outside and waits for his grandpa to show up. But while he's waiting, Akane unexpectedly shows up, and the first thing she does is yell at him. She asks Saito what he's doing here, so he explains that his grandpa asked him to come, and as it turns out, Akane's grandma invited her here for tea as well. The situation is strange, and neither of them knows what's going on, but they still can't stand each other, so they end up bickering as usual. Just then, Saito's grandpa and Akane's grandma show up, and they've got something important to tell the two kids, so everyone heads inside. A feast has been prepared because the two grandparents want to celebrate, but Saito has no idea what they are supposedly celebrating here. He also notices that Akane hasn't touched her food at all, so he asks if she's alright. But his concern is met with a roast because Akane says his ugly face made her lose her appetite. The two start arguing again, and both grandparents find it very amusing since it reminds them of how they used to act when they were back in high school. Saito is getting sick of this, so he asks them what they wanted to talk about, and the two respond saying that Saito and Akane are going to get married. Saito and Akane are in disbelief and think they must have misheard their grandparents, because there's no way they just told the two of them to get married, especially since they are still in high school, but their grandparents are dead serious about it. Tenryu and Chiyo have known each other since they were kids and were even in love back then, but due to some petty arguments, they ended up drifting apart. Tenryu and Chiyo both ended up marrying other people, but after a lifetime apart, both of their partners are 6 feet under, so the two decided to reconnect, and ever since, Tenryu has been blowing Chiyo's granny back out every night. The point is, even though they're happy with their lives now, they can't help but wonder what could have been had they stayed together as a couple when they were kids. And what better way to relive their youth than to drive their grandkids into it and force the two of them to get married? It sounds like a joke, but they are both fully invested in this plan, and Chiyo expects Akane to give a detailed account of what Saito's backshots feel like later. Akane objects to the marriage because marriage is something that's supposed to be done out of love, not because two old people want to watch their grandkids getting frisky. Plus, Saito points out that it's literally illegal to force kids into marriage, and there's nothing Tenryu or Chiyo can do to make them agree to the marriage. Tenryu had expected that response, which is why he came prepared with some legal blackmail. He signals for the door to be opened and gives Saito an ultimatum. Either he marries Akane or the dog dies. Saito doesn't really care because that's not his dog, but then Tenryu threatens to write Saito out of his will and renounce him as his heir. That's something Saito does care about, so he's starting to think that marrying Akane might not be so bad, but Akane is still strictly opposed because if she's going to get married and she only wants to do it with someone she loves. Just then, Chiyo calls Akane over, so Akane goes to her grandma's side, and she whispers something into Akane's ear, and whatever she said must have been a serious threat, because it sends shivers down Akane's spine. Now that all the blackmail has been laid out, Tenryu says he is giving the two of them 3 days to decide whether they'll get married to each other or not. And then they zoom off so Tenryu can blow Kyo's back out again. Once their grandparents are gone, Akane asks Saito what they're going to do, but neither of them has made a decision. Getting too soon would be really bad for Saito, but he needs to have all the details first, so he asks Akane what threat her grandma made, so he knows how bad her situation is. Akane gets defensive and refuses to tell him, since it's a private matter. Later that night, Akane is laying in bed and thinking about how she has never managed to outperform Saito, and what pisses her off even more is the fact that he always beats her, without even trying. She decides to call Himari to ask for advice on what she should do, and after explaining the situation of being forced to marry someone she doesn't like, hypothetically, of course, Himari is surprised that stuff like that still happens. Akane asks what Himari would do if she were in the same situation, so Himari tells her that she would have to refuse since she has someone she already likes, and she would never marry someone else. Akane is surprised to hear that Himari has a crush since she has never mentioned him before, but that's just because Akane never asked. Akane asks for the details, but Himari doesn't want to tell her the guy's name for now since she still hasn't confessed him yet, although she doesn't admit that it's someone from their class. They've talked about Himari's love life enough for one night, so Himari changes the subject and asks Akane if she's in love with anyone. Akane has never had time to fall in love with someone before, and right now, the only emotion Akane is feeling is a burning hatred for a certain someone. Since Akane doesn't have a crush or anything, Himari thinks it would be fine if she just got married like her grandparents want. After all, assuming this hypothetical guy isn't a serial killer, they could just live together and split rent and bills, so it would be a great way for Akane to save on living expenses. Although, she probably need to give birth to an heir at some point, so she might end up getting non-stop backshots to make that happen, and Akane doesn't think she could handle that. Meanwhile, back at his house, Saito is having a panic attack, because he already has a hard enough time dealing with Akane at school. But if they end up married, then he will never be able to escape her constant nagging. Sato's cousin, Shizzy, can tell that something is bothering him, so she asks him what's wrong, and Saito explains that their grandpa is threatening to disown him if he doesn't agree to his demands. That definitely sounds like something their grandpa would do, so she asks Saito what he plans to do. She's perfectly fine with him giving up his rights to the company if that's what he wants, because even if he ends up becoming a hobo, she will still love him the same. However, she knows that Saito has big dreams, and if he is going to accomplish those dreams, then he will need access to the Hojo group's resources. Regardless of what he chooses to do, she promises that she will be by his side to help him every step of the way, and Saito is really glad to have her with him. 3 days go by, and both Saito and Akane meet with their grandparents because they have made their decisions and are going to get married. Since that has been settled, Saito says he and Akane will file the paperwork for their marriage once they've graduated, but that's not good enough for their grandparents because they expect Saito and Akane to be in their life as a married couple immediately. They've even got a brand new house lined up for them, so they drop them off there and drive off. Akane starts freaking out because she can't just suddenly start living with Saito, but Saito is already desensitized to the BS his grandpa pulls, so this doesn't surprise him. The two of them head inside, and if nothing else, this house is actually pretty nice, so Akane thinks living here might actually be fun, or it would be if she didn't have to stay here with Saito. This place is fully equipped with everything they could possibly need, but there's just one problem: there's only one bed. They call their grandparents to complain about the bed, but they intentionally set it up that way because they want Saito and Akane to sleep together. In fact, they are making it an official rule that Akane and Saito must sleep in the same bed every single night, and Shio wishes Akane luck with the inevitable pounding she'll receive. Saito realizes that their grandparents must have set up cameras in order to watch them at night, which is most definitely illegal, but he can't figure out where they put them. However, while Saito is worrying about the cameras, Akane is worrying about having to sleep in the same bed as him. She nervously asks if he really intends to do it tonight, but Saito has no idea what she's talking about, so Akane gets embarrassed and starts yelling because she thinks he's going to double stuff her all night until she can't walk anymore. Saito has no idea how she came to that conclusion, but he tells her he has no intention of doing that. However, Akane still doesn't trust him, so she threatens to stab him with her comically large pencil if he tries anything and runs out of the bedroom. For now, they still need to get their stuff unpacked, so Akane is carrying her stuff upstairs, but that box looks pretty heavy, so Saito asks if she needs any help. Akane rejects his offer because she thinks Saito just wants to get a hold of her stuff so he can do pervy stuff with it. Besides, she's perfectly capable of doing it by herself. If she doesn't want his help, Saito isn't going to force the issue. After taking a few steps, Akane loses her footing and falls backwards. Thankfully, she wasn't falling with an umbrella, so Saito catches her and she's perfectly safe. But he asks that she be a little more careful, because if she ends up getting herself killed, he become the prime murder suspect. After everything has been unpacked, Saito finds a meal his grandpa left for him to eat, and Tenryu may be a jerk sometimes, but this is actually pretty helpful. After warming up the pizza, Saito is about to start eating, but Akane smells the food and she's really hungry, but she's too stubborn to ask for a piece. Saito doesn't want her to starve, so he ends up giving her a slice, but she takes it and immediately leaves without even saying thank you. A few minutes later, Saito is ready for bed, so he heads into the bedroom and lays down to go to sleep. But then Akane comes in and he remembers that they have to share the bed. They both agreed that they weren't going to do anything, but there's no way Saito can fall asleep like this. To distract himself, he starts a conversation and asks Akane why she agreed to this marriage, but she still doesn't want to give any details about her reasons. This marriage is just a formality, so she's just going to have to put up with it for the sake of her dream, even if it means following their grandparents' weird rules. Saito suddenly realizes that if their grandparents can arbitrarily make up rules whatever they want, then it's only a matter of time before they make a rule about the two of them having kids. Akane realizes he's right, so she freaks out a little, and in the process, Saito accidentally touches her, but so yet another fight ensues. That brings us back to the present, where Akane reminds Saito that under no circumstances is he allowed to tell anyone that they are married. Saito tells her that he already intends to keep it a secret, but Akane still doesn't trust him because what guy wouldn't want to brag about getting married to her? The story continues. We see next day they walk into the classroom together. Akane is stopped by Himari, who noticed her talking to Saito outside earlier. Curious, Himari asks what that was about. Akane, flustered and unwilling to reveal their secret, quickly says it was nothing. Himari finds this strange since Akane seemed angry at Saito before. Hoping to end the conversation, Akane lies and says she just told him to stop speaking to her so casually. Meanwhile, Saito sits at his desk, only to find Shizzy standing in front of him with a blank expression. She steps closer and sniffs him, noticing his shampoo smells different. She asks where he slept last night. Saito, wanting to hide his secret marriage to Akane, awkwardly looks away and claims his dad bought a weird shampoo, so he's trying out. She keeps her dull gaze and remarks it's not just the shampoo, he smells like a girl. Without another word, she leans in and gently bites his neck. Then, as if concluding a mystery, she states you must be married. Sato's eyes widen in shock. Before he can respond, Shizzy reveals she noticed strange behavior from their grandpa and his company, so she investigated. She even discovered their new house. As she's about to say he married Akane, Saito covers her mouth and rushes her out of the classroom, takes her up a single flight of stairs, and is seen panting heavily. Our boy needs to start hitting the gym. Shizzy smirks and tells him she has no reason to keep his secret since he never informed her about the marriage. However, she offers to stay quiet on one condition. After some thought, she decides her price. His life will be in her hands from now on. A couple of hours later, Saito slumps at his desk, exhausted after an intense PE class. Just as he starts to relax, Akane and Himari approach him. Akane scolds him for leaving the PE equipment out instead of putting it back in the storeroom. Saito defends himself, explaining that the next class would be using the equipment, so he thought it would help to leave it out. Their bickering escalates, drawing amused looks from their classmates, who have grown used to their banter and find it entertaining. Later that afternoon at home, Saito is reading when he hears Akane scream from the kitchen. Rushing in, he finds her standing in front of the open fridge. She demands to know why it's filled with so many juice cans. Saito calmly explains that he bought concentrated vegetable juice because it's rich in vitamins and will make them healthier. Akane glares at him and snaps that it won't make them healthier since it lacks proper nutrition. Saito comes prepared, opening the second fridge to reveal shelves stacked with cup noodles. Akane stares in horror before screaming at the top of her lungs. Saito, oblivious to her distress, beams with pride, thinking she's impressed. He confidently explains that her reaction is justified because cup noodles are the ultimate food, cheap, quick and convenient. Akane glares at the ground, dreading the conversation, and asks where he plans to get his protein. But Saito, ever prepared, grabs a bottle and his trusty tub of protein powder, proudly declaring that humanity invented protein shakes for this exact reason. He mixes one with dramatic flair, adding that the ideal shake balances whey and casein in perfect harmony. Sliding the bottle across the table, he offers her a taste. She looks at him with increasing alarm, asking if he plans to survive solely on cup noodles and vegetable juice. Saito nods, insisting that this is the pinnacle of cooking. Akane, exasperated, retorts that it's not cooking at all, just a sad science experiment. He repeatedly tries to coax her into drinking the shake, but she stubbornly refuses, calling it disgusting. Her expression shifts to one of deep concern as she realizes his diet could kill him, and if he dies, their marriage ends with him. Determined to intervene, Akane declares she'll show him what real cooking looks like. Saito dismisses her, saying he's fine with his protein shake, but she cuts him off and orders him to watch. She quickly dons a cooking apron and gets to work. As she moves around the kitchen, she glances at Saito, seated at the dining table with a blank, almost puppy-like expression. She thinks to herself that he'll be blown away by how good her food tastes. When she finally places the food in front of him and sits across the table, she waits eagerly for his reaction. Saito picks up his chopsticks and cautiously checks the dish for hidden traps, such as nails or explosives. Finding none, he takes a bite. His eyes widen slightly as memories of childhood meals flood back and a faint smile appears on his face. Akane, still watching, asks him what he thinks. To her surprise, he says it's just a simple home-cooked meal, but to him it means everything. Offended, she snatches the plate away, declaring that if it's not good enough, she'll feed it to the dogs. Saito tries to grab it back, protesting that he never said it was bad. Akane, still fuming, snaps that he didn't say it was good either, leaving her seething as they argue over the plate. Saito grabs the plate and starts eating while Akane tries to stop him. Once he's done, he sets the plate on the table, claps his hands in a quick prayer, and leans back, satisfied with his full stomach. The next morning, Akane tries to wake Saito up for school, but he's fast asleep, dreaming about cuddling in bed with his cousin Shizzy. Still caught in his dream, he pulled Akane into bed, mistaking her for Shizzy. After a few moments, she snaps out of it and yells at him to get up. They both get out of bed, and Saito apologizes, saying he didn't realize she'd come to wake him for school. Akane, however, tells him she didn't wake him up for school to scold him for leaving the dishes unwashed. Since she cooked dinner the night before, she insists it's only fair for him to do the cleaning. Saito responds casually, saying she should just use the clean utensils for now, and he'll do the dishes later when they pile up. This infuriates Akane, and she yells at him to do the dishes immediately. Saito brushes it off, explaining that he's used to cleaning once a month and doesn't see the big deal. Akane is horrified to hear this, her heart skipping a beat at the thought of someone cleaning only once a month. Saito, noticing her reaction, tells her not to be so against the idea of living with trash, claiming humans can coexist peacefully with it. Akane screams back, saying she doesn't want to live with trash. She wants a proper, clean, and beautiful life. It's clear they're complete opposites. Saito doesn't care much for cleanliness and even questions why people take baths so often, while Akane is nearly in tears, unable to believe she's sharing a roof with someone like him. Later that morning as they walk to school, Saito trails behind Akane, wondering how they'll survive this marriage with such opposing values. That night, Saito is happily playing the new zombie video game that just dropped. He's completely absorbed, blasting zombie heads on screen, when Akane walks in, complaining about the noise. She glances at the screen and immediately covers her eyes, disgusted by the gore, and tells him to stop playing. Saito refuses, so they start tugging at the console in a heated argument. In the middle of the chaos, the doorbell rings and Akane lets go of the console. Saito stumbles backward, accidentally turning the game off in the process. Our boy then freezes in shock as he realizes his 12 hours of gameplay has been erased, since his dumbass forgot to click on save. Hours later, Saito wraps a towel around his waist and heads to the bathroom for a bath, since he can no longer stand his horrible stench. As he steps inside, he freezes again. Akane is already there, her eyes closed, fully naked and unaware of his presence. She doesn't even know this when he enters, so Saito walks out with an embarrassed expression. As he's about to leave the bathroom, he starts thinking it's strange that she didn't notice him at all. He wonders if she might have passed out or something. He steps back into the bathroom and sees her in the same position, eyes closed. She's breathing, so he assumes she's just asleep. Then it hits him, this is how people end up drowning. He calls out to her, trying to wake her up. To his surprise, she just murmurs gibberish. Deciding not to push it, he turns to leave, but her head tilts dangerously close to the water. Saito rushes in and tries to lift her out of the bath, but he isn't strong enough and she ends up falling onto him. She rests against his chest for a moment, before waking up and realizing the situation. With tears forming in her eyes, she asks why she's naked with him and accuses him of assault. Saito stammers, trying to explain, but she doesn't listen and calls him a pervert, ordering him to get out. A short while later, Akane is dressed and blow-drying her hair, still stunned that Saito, her biggest rival, saw her naked. She begins to consider that she might have fallen asleep in the bath, and wonders if he was actually trying to help her. Later that night, Saito is reading in bed when Akane walks into the room, a hint of guilt visible on her face. Feeling bad about how she reacted earlier, she tries to start a conversation and apologize. But Saito, clearly not in the mood, simply says he's going to sleep. That reaction for him hurts her feelings, and she starts quietly crying in bed. The next day at school, Himari notices Akane seems down and asks what's wrong. Hearing the question, Akane rushes to hug Himari. They sit down and Akane explains her problem with Saito, but she keeps his identity anonymous because she doesn't want Himari to know about their marriage. Himari thinks it over and suggests giving the person a big hug. Akane immediately rejects that idea. Instead, Himari advises her to talk things out with the person, reminding her that respect is a two-way street. It's about respecting them too. Meanwhile, Saito is having lunch outside with Shizzy and venting about his issues with Akane. Shizzy bluntly suggests they get a divorce, but Saito disagrees, saying he can't give up because he needs to honor the promise he made to his grandfather. Since divorce isn't an option, Shizzy advises him to focus on getting along with Akane. She stands up from the bench and tells him it's not that hard. All he has to do is listen to her, be sensitive and learn to compromise. Later that day, Saito comes home, determined to try Shizzy's advice. But as he opens the door, he sees Akane standing there with an intensely angry expression. Startled, he tries to walk past her, thinking he'll follow the advice later. Before he can leave, Akane grabs his arm, her expression softening as she gently asks if they can talk. Saito assumes she's about to bring up divorce, but to his surprise, she wants to discuss how they can make their marriage work. A few moments later, they sit across from each other with cups of tea, agreeing they'll need to set some ground rules if they're going to live together. Saito begins by saying he prefers washing his clothes and dishes only when they pile up, but Akane raises her voice slightly, saying she refuses to live such a dirty lifestyle. Hearing that, Saito agrees to do his laundry more often, which surprises Akane since she didn't expect him to be a cooperative. With that settled, Saito asks Akane to allow him to touch her body, but not in the way you think. He just wants her to tolerate the occasional bumping of their bodies at night, clarifying that it's just because the bed is cramped. Akane hesitantly agrees, her face flushed, but she warns him that she won't forgive him if he tries touching under her clothes. Now that they've addressed the basics, Saito suggests they make it a habit to thank each other for even the smallest things, believing it will help them grow closer. Akane agrees, but insists he compliment her cooking more. She reminds him of how he previously called her food normal, which she didn't consider praise. Saito, on the other hand, thinks calling it normal should be enough, but he doesn't argue further. Later that night, Akane is on the phone with Himari, telling her they made some small progress in their relationship. She notices Saito approaching and quickly ends the call. When Saito enters the room, he sees her lying on the bed with a deep blush, awkwardly giving him permission to touch her body. But our boy decides to fumble the bag as usual and tells her that he's not going to do that. Over time, things start improving between them. One day, Saito surprises Akane with a thoughtful gift, showing he's willing to put in effort for their relationship. That evening, Akane prepares an extravagant dinner with several delicious dishes. This time, Saito compliments the food, saying it's really good. Akane blushes, locking eyes with him, and shyly says she's glad to hear that. After the meal, Saito takes it upon himself to wash the dishes, but he can't stop thinking about how Akane looked at him after his compliment. Just then, Akane joins him in the kitchen and offers to help with the dishes. Saito is shocked since he never thought of her as the type to care about helping out. As she washes alongside him, he starts to see her in a new light. He realizes that while he's only seen her in bad moods before, she's actually really beautiful when she's not angry. The story continues. We see one night, Saito is busy reading his favorite book when Akane interrupts him. She tells him she rented a movie that caught her attention. Saito assumes she wants him to move, so he starts to get up, but Akane stops him. Confused, he stares at her, unsure of what she wants. With a shy and embarrassed expression, she holds up the movie tape. 24 uncut hours of kitten footage. She says she wants them to watch it together. Saito is baffled and considers this to be utter bullshit, wondering why anyone would want to watch kittens for 24 hours straight. Fortunately, Akane finds the 3-hour version of the movie instead, and Saito quickly suggests they watch that version instead. They begin watching the movie, and while Akane enjoys every second of it, Saito dozes off on the couch, bored out of his mind. When the movie ends, Akane expresses how much she loved it and suggests they watch the full 24-hour version next time. Saito suddenly wakes up from his nap, disoriented and muttering something about an alien planet. Since they watch something Akane likes, she insists it's only fair for Saito to pick the next thing to watch. However, Saito admits he prefers games to movies. Unfortunately, Akane doesn't know how to play games. Determined, Saito holds his controller up and vows to teach her, hoping she might even enjoy gaming as much as he does. Akane doubts she'll ever like it, let alone get addicted. 30 minutes later, Akane is having the time of her life, celebrating her victory after defeating a game boss. She cheers loudly and Saito watches her with a faint smile, surprised at how much fun he's having with his so-called arch-nemesis. Later that night, as they lie in bed, Saito wakes up and notices Akane isn't covered by the blanket. He adjusts it, pulling the blanket over her. To his surprise, Akane is already awake. She thanks him for the fun they had that day. Facing opposite directions in bed, Saito tells her she can pick the next game they buy, and he'll pick the next movie they watch. Akane then tells him to stop addressing her without actually using her name, adding that she prefers when he calls her Akane. The next day at school, Akane helps Saito pick up an eraser he dropped. As Saito lifts his head from his desk, he thanks her and Akane blushes lightly in response. Himari walks up to Akane moments later and asks if she and Saito had a fight. Not wanting anyone to know she's getting along with Saito, Akane insists they're always fighting. However, Himari senses something is off. Their behavior doesn't match their usual constant bickering. Feeling cornered, Akane rushes out of the classroom and goes home, skipping the first period entirely. A few hours later, Saito is in the library searching for a book when Shizzy sneaks up behind him. She covers his eyes with her hands and playfully asks him to guess who it is. Knowing Shizzy is the only person who would pull such a stunt, Saito correctly guesses it's her. She laughs and removes her hands from his eyes, confirming his guess. Shizzy notices Saito holding a book on communication skills, and although she knows that his communication skills are dog water, she still asks him what it's for. Saito explains that he thinks it might help him strengthen his relationship with Akane. He mentions that he's learned so far that teamwork between both parties can build solidarity. During the break, Saito calls out to Akane as she walks down the hall. Akane turns around with an annoyed look, saying she prefers not to talk much at school. Saito asks if she's busy or has plans for later in the day. When he learns she's free, he invites her to go shopping with him after school. Akane realizes this might be a date, but before she can overreact, Saito quickly pulls her into an empty room to avoid being overheard. Akane scolds him for dragging her into such a dark space, because she thinks he's trying to get some. But Saito isn't trying to catch a case, so he clarifies that he only did it because she was about to say something about a date. Akane blushes slightly and points out that it's basically a date, since guys and girls don't just meet up for no reason. Saito tries to brush it off, saying it's not a date and that he only needs her help to carry groceries. Akane finds this amusing and decides to play along, leading them both to laugh like total goofballs. After school, Akane is startled when Himari greets her excitedly. Himari's shift at work got cancelled, and she wants to hang out. However, Akane already has plans with Saito, and doesn't know how to tell her. Himari enthusiastically talks about all the fun they could have together, but Akane, with tears in her eyes, admits she already has plans with someone. Himari takes no offense and curious, asks if it's a new friend. When Akane says it's someone Himari knows, Himari quickly guesses it's Saito and teasingly asks if it's a date. Flustered, Akane speeds off to avoid answering any more questions. As Akane runs, she suddenly trips over Shizzy, who's lying on the ground. Startled, Akane helps her up and apologizes repeatedly, asking why Shizzy was on the floor. Shizzy casually says she was waiting for her, but Shizzy doesn't let people step on her without consequences, so she hands Akane a legendary sword as compensation. Akane, uninterested, slowly walks away, saying she doesn't care about such things. Before Akane leaves, Shizzy asks if she plans to build teamwork with Saito, and blocks her path until she answers. Akane, not wanting to deal with this, apologizes and runs off in the opposite direction. Later, Akane and Saito walk through the park, both blushing as they approach the supermarket near their homes. Inside, Saito notices they're out of eggs at home and picks up a pack to place in the cart. Akane stops him, pointing out that he should check the price before just adding things to the cart. A few minutes later, Akane discovers the supermarket is holding a limited time sale, and a crowd is already gathered to grab the discounted items. She tries to push her way through the chaos, but quickly gets shoved to the side. Saito attempts to jump in as well, but he's tossed aside even faster than Akane. Left lying on the floor in shame, they both burst into laughter at how troubled they were at fighting for the sale. Akane stands up, smiling, and declares that she isn't going to give up. Saito gets up too, but he admits he's ready to quit. Akane looks him in the eye and tries to rizz him up by insisting he has to come with her. Our boy has successfully been rizzed up, so he blushes and agrees, and then after that, the two walk home together. That night, Akane wakes up to find Saito with his finger in front of her face, about to poke her cheek. She sits up and immediately scolds him, accusing him of planning something as gruesome as gouging a hole in her cheek. Saito denies her accusation and decides to admit he's a total simp by explaining that he couldn't resist poking her cheek because she looks so cute while sleeping. Akane blushes at his response and hugs her pillow. She lies back down and tells him he can watch her sleep, but only for a little while, which is still very creepy. The next morning, they both wake up and greet each other with awkward blushes. Later that afternoon, on their way to school, they pass by a stall selling strawberry cream buns. Akane wants one, so Saito goes to buy it for her. He returns with the pastry in hand, but it's too large for her to eat alone. He suggests they split it, and as they share the cream bun, Himari spots them. She's surprised because she's never seen them together outside school and begins to suspect something is going on between them. Akane quickly denies it, claiming Saito was just stalking her. That night, Akane stays up late studying for an upcoming test. Saito, on the other hand, doesn't see the point in studying. He boasts that he never studies and just memorizes everything from class, even scoring perfectly on the last test. Akane takes this as mockery, throws her pillow at him, and tells him to leave. A few minutes later, Saito knocks on her door and hands her a snack, thinking it might help her focus. She opens the door and is delighted to see a strawberry cake. She takes it inside, wondering why he would go out of his way to make it for her. She decides to take one bite and is overwhelmed by how delicious it is. Filled with joy, she eats the cake. Knowing the sugar will help her power through the night, Saito prepares more dishes for her, which she eats with a happy smile. The next morning at school, Akane is walking through the halls when she suddenly collapses. Luckily, Himari is nearby and rushes to her side. Himari asks if she's okay, and Akane reassures her that she's fine, just a bit sleep-deprived from studying all night. Himari urges her not to push herself too hard and reminds her that her health is more important. But Akane is more focused on getting the top grade in the class. Himari advises her again, pointing out that she'll never outscore Saito. Despite this, Akane remains determined to surpass Saito in every way. That evening, Saito brings her a late-night snack, only to find her slumped over her desk. Assuming she's fallen asleep, he moves closer but notices her uncomfortable expression. He quickly realizes she isn't feeling well. Saito checks Akane's temperature and sees that it's a worrying 40 degrees. She's clearly burning up from a fever. Akane complains about feeling sweaty and uncomfortable, so Saito grabs a wet rag and carefully cleans the areas where she's sweating the most. As he tends to her, Akane mumbles weakly, talking about how much she needs to study if she ever wants to achieve her dream of becoming a doctor. She explains that her ultimate goal is to help people live long, healthy lives and to be someone who can step in whenever someone is in need. Akane's voice turns quieter as she shares how her parents can afford to send her to medical school. She reveals that the only reason she agreed to marry Saito in the first place was because her grandmother promised to fund her education if she married him. Hearing this, Saito feels a mix of surprise and admiration. He never knew about this deeply personal dream of hers. Akane's frustration starts to spill out. She vents about how hard she studies every day but can never seem to surpass him, even though he barely puts in any effort and still gets perfect scores. Then, almost as if she's confessing something she had buried for a long time, she admits that she's always admired him, even if she never said it out loud before. Realizing what she just admitted, Akane's face turns red, and she yells at him to forget everything she just said. A few minutes later, Saito checks her temperature again. This time has climbed to 42 degrees. Alarmed, he decides it's time to call an ambulance, but Akane insists there's no need for that, and tells him to just go to bed. He tries calling an ambulance anyway, but can't get through. Seeing no other option, he picks her up in his arms and tells her he won't just stand by while she's suffering. As he carries her outside, Akane looks at him with surprise. She never thought he had the strength to lift her so easily. She jokes about him being stronger than she thought he was. Bro will hold on to that compliment for the rest of his life. That aside, Saito decides to use this precious moment to bring up the dream she mentioned earlier. At first, she assumes he's about to roast her about it, but instead he tells her that he believes in her. He's confident she'll achieve her dream because she's someone who never gives up, no matter how hard things get. While running toward the hospital, Saito reflects on their unusual marriage. Though he initially disliked her, he finds himself thinking that maybe this marriage could end up being something wonderful after all. The scene shifts to the following morning. Akane wakes Saito up by leaning over him with a playful smirk and a mock death threat. She quickly laughs it off, saying he should be grateful she woke him up in time for school. Saito groans, realizing she's back to her usual antics. It turns out Akane only had a bad cold that day, and a week later, everything is returned to normal. At school, Saito's day starts with Himari approaching him to congratulate him on his perfect test score. She can flirt with him a little, but her attempts go completely over his head. Not long after, Akane walks up to him with a deadly serious look in her eyes. For a second, he braces himself for a scolding, but her expression softens into a blush. She reminds him that he has a wife, and warns him not to get too close to other girls. As she turns and walks away, Saito can't help but smile to himself. Watching her, he thinks that maybe he really does have the cutest wife in the world. The story continues. We see before they head into class, Akane gives Saito the lunchbox she made for him. She is upset that he forgot to bring it with him and thinks he doesn't like her cooking. But on the contrary, Saito says he loves Akane's cooking, so it really was just an accident that he forgot it. They head into class, and when lunchtime arrives, the two of them prepare to begin eating. But before Saito could take even a single bite, Shizzy comes over and says she's hungry. So is his little sister. She demands to be given his entire lunch. Saito reminds her that she already had 3 bowls of rice, but Shizzy doesn't care about the food she ate before. All that matters is that Saito has food and she wants that food. Everyone in class decides to butt in on the argument, and since Shizzy is cute, they all take her side and tell Saito to let her have some of his food. Saito eventually caves and lets Shizzy sit in his lap so she can have a little bite of his food, but all of a sudden, Himari walks over, and the first thing she notices is that Saito and Akane's lunches look the same. They may be arranged differently, but they got the exact same ingredients, so it's almost like Akane made Saito's lunch for him. She jokes that the two of them must be going out with each other after all, but they both deny immediately. In fact, they were a little too quick to deny it, so all their classmates start getting suspicious that something might actually be going on between the two of them. Saito tries to think up a good excuse for why he has the same lunch as Akane, but when he turns back to his bento box, he finds it completely clean. It shouldn't be humanly possible to eat food that quickly or efficiently, but when it comes to her brother's food, Shizzy will always find a way. Since the incriminating bento is gone, all of Saito's classmates lose interest in the conversation and walk away. Shizzy tries to act like this was her plan all along, but that's a lie because she really just wanted to eat Saito's food. A little while later, Saito is walking through the halls when he happens to run into Himari. She jumps down the staircase and says she has something to ask regarding his lunch earlier. She wants to know if Akane actually did make the bento for him or not, but Saito obviously can't tell her the truth, so he lies and tells her that he and Akane just happened to use the same ingredients. Himari then asks if Akane and Saito are dating, so Saito says they aren't, and Himari seems satisfied by that answer, so apologizes for asking such a weird question and walks off. Later that night, Saito and Akane are in bed, but Akane seems to be a little on edge because she can hear something moving. She turns around to see what it is, and to her horror, there's a terrifying figure standing over the bed. She screams so loud that Saito thinks they are under attack, but when he asks Akane what's wrong, she just tells him she thinks she saw a ghost over there. Saito takes a look, but he doesn't see anything, so he decides to go back to sleep, but Akane is too scared to sleep, so she begs Saito to stay awake with her until she calms down. Since Akane doesn't want to sleep, Saito suggests that the two of them do some reading to take their mind off it. However, a few moments later, Akane comes running into Saito's study room because she heard more ghost sounds coming from the living room. Saito asks if she managed to record anything as proof, but she didn't, so he thinks Akane is overreacting. He heads out of the room, and Akane asks him where he's going, so he tells her he's just going to the bathroom. However, Akane still doesn't want to be left alone, so she begs Saito to let her in the bathroom with him while he takes a dump. Saito did not agree to her request, but that wasn't the end of it, because a few minutes later, Akane comes into Saito's room and tells him she's about to take a bath, so she wants him to come in with her. Saito can't believe what he's hearing, but Akane is dead serious about it, so he ends up sitting outside to shower while Akane takes a bath. The next day, Saito meets with Shizzy on the roof of the school, and he's complaining a lot about how weird Akane has been acting recently. Akane keeps talking about some ghosts running around their house, but he doesn't think it's true since he has never seen anything himself. Shizzy, on the other hand, says there really might be a ghost, but to confirm, she needs to talk with Akane. With that said, Shizzy loathes causing mischief, so as soon as she sees Akane, she decides to play a harmless little prank and nearly yells that Akane is married to Saito. However, before she could finish that sentence, she gets silenced and abducted by Saito and Akane. They bring her to an empty classroom, and now that there's no threat of their secret being exposed, Akane begins seething with rage because she told Saito not to tell anyone about their marriage. In Saito's defense, he never actually told Shizzy about his marriage, she just kind of figured it out on her own, so there was nothing he could do about it. Shizzy confirms this, and now that Akane thinks about it, it is natural for Shizzy to have found out since she is Sato's little sister. Moving on, Shizzy mentions that she heard Akane was scared of ghosts in her house, so Shizzy is here to tell her that her house is most definitely haunted, and the ghost will make Akane's test scores drop if they don't do anything about it soon. Saito can tell that Shizzy is just trying to mess with Akane, but Akane totally believes every word Shizzy is saying, so she asks Shizzy to please come to their house and get rid of the ghost. Once they arrive, Shizzy begins making a big deal of just how haunted this house really is, but not to worry, she knows exactly how to get rid of ghosts. But to do that, she has to go through all their personal belongings. They arrive at Sato's study room, but since he barely ever studies, it's more like a library. Shizzy assumes that means Saito has naughty magazines in there, but he never said that, and he definitely doesn't have any in his room. Shizzy is still convinced that there are magazines to be found, so she decides to search his room. Saito lets her do it since he knows there's nothing embarrassing for her to find, but to his horror, he was wrong. Shizzy manages to find a pair of his underwear, and let's not talk about what she's doing with his underwear. Next, Shizzy wants to check Akane's room, but after seeing what Shizzy did with Sato's underwear, Akane doesn't want to risk letting Shizzy anywhere near her clothes. They move on to the bedroom, and Akane explains that she clearly saw the ghost standing over the bed right here. Shizzy puts a lot of thought into what the ghost could have possibly been, and then she comes to the conclusion that she was the ghost all along. In truth, Shizzy got keys to the house from their grandpa, so she visited Saito and Akane in the middle of the night without telling them. The reason she was sneaking around so much and standing over their bed all night was because she was hoping to watch Saito and Akane get hit and steamy in bed, but that never happened. Anyway, Shizzy is hungry now, so she says she wants to stay over for dinner. However, even though Akane is relieved to find out that there's no ghosts, there's no way she's going to reward Shizzy by giving her a home-cooked dinner. But then Shizzy starts complimenting Akane's cooking skills, and after a lot of flattery, Akane ends up making a lavish meal for Shizzy. Shizzy is really enjoying the meal, and Akane is glad that Shizzy likes her food. But when Shizzy gets a piece of food stuck on her cheek, Saito picks it off her face without a second thought, so Akane can't help but notice that the two of them seem usually close with one another. After dinner, Saito and Shizzy head to the living room to play some games together. And yet again, Akane can't help but get the feeling that some incest is going on here. I mean, look at them. Saito can tell that Akane is slightly mad about something, and while she is a little bit jealous of how close Saito is with Shizzy, she won't admit that, so she yells that she's not mad at all. Saito is really confused and doesn't know what Akane could possibly be upset about, but he doesn't want to stick around to find out, so he says he's going to take a bath. Shizzy gets up as well and says she'll follow him, but this is where Akane draws the line, since Shizzy is pretty much the same age as Saito, so there's no way this is okay. Shizzy says she and Saito always bathe together, so it's not a big deal. Although as far as Saito remembers, the last time he had a bath with Shizzy was before he moved in with Akane. Akane has heard enough at this point and declares that the two of them are not allowed to bathe together in this house, no matter how natural they think it is. A couple hours later, Saito is lying in bed when Akane comes into the bedroom. She asks where Shizzy is, so Saito tells her that Shizzy is still playing games in the living room. Akane is relieved, since that means she can finally talk with Saito in private. Saito has no idea what she wants to talk about, but he's willing to listen, so he puts his book down. The first thing Akane wants to talk about is that cat game he was playing with Shizzy. Saito usually never buys cat games, so if she had known that he bought a cat-themed game for her sake, then she would have asked to play with him. Saito says he didn't bring it up because he knew how much Akane wanted to study, but even so, Akane would have gladly taken a break to play with him. Also, she wishes she could have played it before Shizzy did, but Saito has no idea why that would be important to her. He asks if there's a special reason behind it, but Akane just gets embarrassed and yells that for someone so smart, Saito can be really dumb at times. Yelling at Saito somehow made Akane feel a lot better, but there's still one more complaint she has. She tells Saito that she thinks he pampers Shizzy a little too much, but again, Saito thinks it's perfectly normal, besides Shizzy is blood-related. All of a sudden, Akane feels a hand grab her ass and Saito feels a hand drifting dangerously close to his meat, so both of them are getting really mixed signals right now. They both deny doing anything, and a few seconds later, Shizzy pops out from underneath the covers and it turns out she was just messing with him again. She says she is going to spend the night in their bed so she can be next to Saito while she sleeps like always. Again, Akane can't believe that Saito always sleeps with Shizzy, but Shizzy really enjoys lying next to her brother. Akane gets to have him all to herself most of the time anyway, so one day with Shizzy shouldn't be a problem. Akane tries to explain that she only sleeps with Saito because their grandparents forced her, but Shizzy assumes Akane just wants to be alone with Saito, so she offers to sleep on the floor instead. However, Akane doesn't want Shizzy to misunderstand anything, so she says they should all sleep together after all. Later that night, Shizzy turns to Akane and tells her that she needs to be more direct about her feelings for Saito. Akane tries to act like she doesn't know what Shizzy is talking about, but Shizzy could clearly see that Akane was jealous of how much Saito was pampering her. Although Saito is really dense when it comes to things like this, so he will never figure it out unless Akane tells him herself. Shizzy continues, saying she's glad Saito has someone like Akane around since she was worried he might end up alone for the rest of his life. But when Akane asks Shizzy to explain what she means, Shizzy just goes to sleep. The story continues. We see Himari meets up with Akane at a cafe, and the first thing she does once they get seated is ask Akane if she likes Saito. Akane is caught off guard, so she frantically denies any affection for Saito, but she's curious why Himari would ask such a question in the first place. Himari admits that she's got a crush on Saito, but Akane doesn't understand what she could possibly see in a guy like him. Himari says she loves everything about Saito, like how handsome and prepared he always is. There was this one time that a girl on their sports team fainted from a heat stroke, but while everyone else was panicking, Saito remained calm and took charge of the situation. Now that Akane thinks about it, she realizes Saito is pretty reliable in a crisis, but that's beside the point. Himari says she really admires someone who knows how to keep things together, and Saito is always nice to her, so she was hoping Akane could get Saito to like her back. Akane agrees to help her, but she doesn't know how exactly she's supposed to help, so she asks Himari what she wants her to do. Himari says she just wants Akane to give her some information about Saito's interests, so she can relate to him more. But come to think of it, Akane doesn't actually know much about Saito. Later that evening, Saito finds Akane standing behind him with a pen and notepad in her hand. He's a little freaked out, so he asks her what she's doing, but Akane just says she's observing him and doesn't explain further. Saito tries to ignore her, but Akane keeps following him around, and even when it's dinner time, she holds her camera up to his face. He asks her if there's a reason she's holding the camera so close to his face, but Akane can't tell him about Himari's crush, so she tells him to just ignore it. Saito decides to just eat his dinner, and while he's eating, Akane asks him if there's a particular type of girl he likes. Saito is surprised by the sudden question, but he tells her he doesn't have a specific type. Next, Akane asks him what his favorite food is, and Saito tells her he likes steak, sushi, and seafood bowls, top the caviar. That last one is a little too fancy, so Akane asks how he likes his steak done, and Saito tells her he prefers his steak rare. At school the next morning, Akane informs Himari of Saito's favorite food, and Himari is glad to learn a side of him she didn't know about before, and since she's so interested in learning more about what Saito likes to do, Akane tells her that Saito likes playing video games and reading books before bed. Himari thinks that's really interesting, but she wonders how Akane could possibly know what Saito likes to do before bed, so Akane has to make up an excuse, and says she overheard him talking about it earlier. That night, Akane is getting ready to make dinner, so Saito asks what's on the menu for the night. Akane tells him she's going to make fish, so Saito is really disappointed. He says he thought she would make steak for him since she was asking him about it yesterday. Akane had never intended to make steak, but since Saito was looking forward to it so much, she agrees to do it, although they're going to need to shop for ingredients. While walking back from the grocery store, Akane tells Saito that she really enjoys doing things like this. It makes her feel kind of nostalgic because she used to go shopping with her mom when she was little, but Saito can't relate to that. When they get home, Akane prepares the steak for Saito just like she promised, and when Saito takes his first bite, he just kind of stares at the plate for a second in shock. Akane thinks Saito must hate the steak she prepared, but he tells her it's actually so good that he wishes he could eat it every day. Akane can't believe Saito is giving her such high praise for her food, but she's happy about it, so she says she'll make as much amazing food as Saito wants. But as she says this, she gets a bit too close to Saito's face, so they both get embarrassed. The next day at school, Himari approaches Saito at his desk and asks him if there's a particular type of girl that he likes. She says she heard that Saito doesn't have a particular type, but she just wants to confirm for herself. First of all, Saito asks her where she got that information, but Himari doesn't want to reveal that she got Akane to ask him, so she pleads the fifth. Anyway, and about her question, Saito says he doesn't agree with the whole categorizing people into types thing. He would never know if he wanted to go out with someone unless he got to know them first. It's answers like that that make Himari love Saito so much. A lot of guys often ask her out without knowing anything about her, and when she asks what they like about her, it's almost always about her chest size. Saito admits it must be rough for pretty girls like her to have to deal with that, but Himari can't get over the fact that Saito just called her pretty. Saito doesn't get why she's so happy about being called pretty, because it's pretty obvious that she's attractive. Once Himari has calmed down, recounts that Saito said he wouldn't know if he likes someone until he got to know them well enough. And since that's the case, she whispers in his ear and asks if he thinks he could fall for someone like her. Saito is caught off guard by her question and asks if she's being serious, but Himari gets embarrassed, says she was only joking, and runs off. Later that day, while Saito is playing games in the living room, Akane sneaks into his room and starts snooping around for information to give Himari, but just when she finds Sato's diary, Saito comes in and spots her. She immediately becomes defensive and yells that she's not funneling information about him to anyone, but Saito has no idea what she's talking about. And even if she's snooping around in his room, it's not like he has any secrets worth looking at. In that case, Akane asks him if he can recommend one of his favorite books to her, and Saito is more than happy to oblige. So he hands her this thick book about history and the art of war, and tells her he enjoys laughing at the stupidity of humans while reading it. Akane doesn't understand the appeal, but she relays the information to Himari anyway. But the next day at school, Himari meets up with Akane and tells her she couldn't understand a single word of it. Akane apologizes because she should have asked Saito to recommend a book that's not so complicated, but Himari actually prefers it this way since she has an excuse to talk to Saito now. Himari then runs over to him and says there's a book she doesn't understand, so she'd like him to help explain it to her. While Himari does this, Akane watches from the door and she's starting to feel a little jealous about how casually Himari can talk to Saito. Saito tells Himari he doesn't mind explaining the book to her. After all, he kinda owes her. Whenever Saito and Akane have fights at school, Himari would always step in to mediate for them, so he's grateful to her for that. Himari says she just doesn't like seeing people fight, but if not for her, Saito genuinely thinks Akane might have killed him once ago. Himari thinks Saito might be exaggerating a little since Akane is actually pretty nice because back in grade school, Akane helped her out when she was getting bullied. Saito is surprised that a social butterfly like Himari was bullied, but back then she wasn't good at talking with people and she looked different, so she was an easy target to make fun of. Her blonde hair may stand out, but Saito thinks it really suits her, so anyone who would make fun of her for it must be really stuck up. Himari thinks it's funny that Saito would say that since Akane said the same thing back in grade school to stick up for her. Thanks to Akane, the bullies finally left Himari alone. Ever since then, Akane has been really important to Himari. Akane hears all this, and she is deeply touched by how much her friend cares about her. But just then, Shizzy appears and asks her if she's jealous of Himari having a crush on Saito. Akane denies being jealous and says she's just surprised by Himari's feelings, but Shizzy tells her Himari's feelings are in no way new. Himari has had a crush on Saito ever since their first year of high school here. Honestly, Shizzy is surprised Akane never noticed because Himari gets along really well with Saito. In fact, they look like they'd be the perfect couple if they started going out. Akane starts looking a bit uncomfortable at the thought of Saito and Himari as a couple, so Shizzy asks her if she's hoping Saito and Himari don't start going out, but Akane doesn't have an answer to that. After school that day, Himari meets Akane outside to thank her for all her help since she got to spend the day talking with Saito about the book. She is really happy, so she offers to buy Akane a strawberry parfait to show her gratitude. She suggests that the two of them could spend the night at Akane's house and have fun like usual. Akane is really excited to have Himari over since it's been a long time since they've gotten to hang out together, but then she realizes that it'd be really bad for Himari to find out that she lives with Saito. She tries to make an excuse that her house is too messy for her to come over, but Himari remembers hearing Shizzy talk about visiting Akane a few days ago, so why would Akane allow Shizzy to come over, but not Himari? Himari assumes Akane must just not like hanging out with her anymore, but Akane assures her that's not the case. Akane eventually ended up agreeing to let Himari come over, so she hurries home to warn Saito ahead of time. They can't let Himari find out that both of them live together, so she asks Saito to hide all his stuff in his room until she leaves. Unfortunately, the doorbell rings and they realize that Himari has already arrived, so they don't have any time to spare. Akane tells Saito to start hiding his stuff while she keeps Himari busy. Saito gets to work gathering his stuff, but he doesn't have enough time to hide it in his room, so he ducks behind the counter as Himari and Akane walk back in. Once Himari and Akane sit down to chat, Himari tells her that she plans to ask Saito out on a date tomorrow, so she wants to know if Akane is okay with that. Akane doesn't understand why Himari is asking for permission from her, so Himari explains that Akane has always been fixated on Saito ever since their freshman year. So even if she claims to hate him, Himari knows some part of he must secretly have a thing for Saito, and Himari wouldn't want to get in the way of that. She likes Saito, but she likes Akane even more, so if Akane isn't comfortable with her going out with Saito, she won't ask him out. Again, Akane assures Himari that she doesn't care if she asks Saito out because she hates him more than anyone in the world. Saito heard the entire conversation, and he's starting to feel down because he didn't realize Akane still hated him so much. The next day, Himari gets Saito alone in an empty classroom to ask him out on a date, and while that's happening, Akane and Shizzy are standing outside the door. That night, while Saito is having dinner with Akane, he tells her about his date with Himari and asks her how she feels about it since they're technically married. Akane gets up and yells that this marriage is fake and that she has no feelings for Saito, so whomever he dates is none of her business. Saito accepts her answer and says he just wanted to make sure she was alright with it, but Akane is already regretting what she said. The next morning, Saito gets dressed and is about to head out the door, but Akane is starting to feel really uncomfortable about this date. She asks him if he's really going to go and Saito plans to, unless of course Akane says she wants him to stay. Akane tells him he can do whatever he wants, so Saito starts walking out the door, but before he leaves, Akane grabs him from behind and says she doesn't want him to go after all. She can't explain why, but the thought of him having fun with another girl makes her really sad, and even if it was a forced marriage, he's still her husband, so she won't let him cheat on her. Saito smiles after hearing this, because that's exactly the kind of reaction Saito was hoping to get. He tells Akane he actually turned Himari down when she asked him out, so he's been lying about having a date this entire time, and now he knows for sure that Akane cares about him. Anyway, since he's dressed up already, he invites Akane out to do some shopping with him to make up for the prank he played on her. The following day at school, Himari greets Saito as usual, and he's surprised that she's acting so normal even though he turned her down, but just because she got rejected once doesn't mean Himari is going to give up. She swears that she will keep trying until Saito falls for her someday. But now that Akane has acknowledged her feelings for Saito, she's not going to sit by and let Himari steal him from her. The story continues. We see Himari wasn't joking when she said she wasn't giving up on Saito, because the very next day she gives him a homemade lunch at school. She heard that Saito really likes steak, so that's what she made for him. However, Saito declines because he already brought his own lunch. She still insists that he at least try some of the lunch she made because she worked really hard on it, and the rest of Saito's classmates end up pressuring him into it, so Saito says he will take a bite. Himari is happy that Saito agreed to eat her lunch, so she feeds him a piece, and after taking the first bite, Saito realizes that the steak she made is actually delicious, so he continues eating it. Akane gets upset that Saito is enjoying Himari's food so much, and even though Himari doesn't understand why Akane would be jealous, she tries to make her feel better by feeding her as well, and Akane gets embarrassed. Later on in the day, Himari approaches Saito again and tells him she's been having a hard time with math class recently, so she was hoping he would tutor her. Saito doesn't see a reason to object, so he agrees to help her study, but then Himari suggests that the two of them can study at her place and her parents won't be home, so it'll just be the two of them. Saito tells her to quit joking around, since that sounds a lot like a date to him, but that's exactly what Himari was going for. After all, she made it very clear that she was going to keep flirting with Saito until he falls in love with her. However, Akane won't stand for this. She could let Himari feeding Saito slide, but there's no way she's letting Saito spend that much alone time at Himari's place. But since she can't explain why she's jealous, she warns Himari that Saito might try to do pervy stuff to her if they are alone, but Himari was actually hoping Saito would do something like that. Akane is now even more against letting Himari have alone time with Saito, so as a compromise, Himari suggests that Akane joins the tutoring session as well. After all, if the two smartest people in class tutor her, then she might be able to get third place on the next exam. Shizzy suddenly materializes after hearing someone threaten her spot on the class rankings, and since Shizzy is the third smartest person in class, Himari suggests that all four of them should have a study session together, and they might as well have it at Akane's house, since there are a lot of them now. Akane once again erases all evidence that Saito is living in the house as well, and once they all get seated, Saito asks Himari what part of the math course she doesn't understand, but Himari says she doesn't understand any of it. Saito rephrases the question and asks her when she first started struggling to understand math class, but it's all been kind of fuzzy for her ever since they started adding letters in math. Akane points out that Himari's grades first started dropping during her first year of high school, and since Saito finally knows where to start, he begins tutoring her, and after a few minutes, Himari is able to solve the math problems on her own. Himari tells Saito he is really good at teaching and asks him to continue, but she gets really close to his face, so Saito tells her to back away because it's embarrassing to be this close and it's making Akane really mad. The next moment, Shizzy clings onto Saito and says she is bored, so Saito suggests they all take a break and plays a game or something, but instead of just picking something like Mario Kart. Akane pulls out a card memory game intent on proving that she is smarter than Saito. But in the end, Saito absolutely demolishes all of them because his memory is really good. He doesn't want to keep playing, so he tells them they can continue without him because he's going out to get some snacks. But while he's out, Akane catches up to him because she can tell Saito is feeling a little down. She starts a conversation by saying she had no idea his memory was so good, but Saito doesn't like to bring it up because people constantly call him creepy for it. Everyone in the Shoujo family is born with one of their traits max. For example, Shizzy is able to calculate huge amounts of data in her head, while Saito has an impossibly good memory, and because of his memory, sometimes memorizes insignificant personal details about other people, making people think he is a stalker or something. She tells Saito that his memory isn't creepy at all, and in fact she would love to have an ability like that since she wouldn't have to study so much, and she'd be able to remember things about the people she cares about. The two eventually return home after buying the snacks, but to their horror, when they get back, they find Himari and Shizzy playing video games on Saito's console. So Akane has to make up an excuse for why it's there, and Saito asks Akane why she didn't hide it away earlier. Anyway, they all sit down to have some snacks, and Himari thanks Saito for his help since she feels like she understands math a lot better now. Saito says tutoring her was fun for him since Himari catches on quickly, so he'd be happy to help if she ever needs tutoring in the future. Himari is happy to hear that because she was actually hoping she could have another study session with him, and maybe next time they could do it at his house instead. Saito chokes up at this a little since this is technically his house, so he tells her she can't come over. Himari thinks it's cute how flustered Saito is, so she tries getting closer to him, but in the process she accidentally knocks over her cup of tea and stains her shirt. Saito instinctively runs over to the drawers to get a towel for Himari to dry her shirt, and Himari is grateful, but she asks how Saito knew where the towels were. Saito tries explaining it away by saying he just guessed, and Himari doesn't question it since Saito is really smart. Anyway, she needs to go take care of the stain on her shirt, so Shizzy leads her to the bathroom, and while she's gone, Akane gets upset with Saito and tells him this is all his fault for agreeing to tutor Himari. Saito says there's nothing wrong with helping a friend study, but Akane is jealous because Saito has never offered to help her study before. However, that's straight up false because Saito clearly remembers trying to help Akane study once and she yelled at him for it. Akane says she only did that because she was too ashamed to accept help from her arch nemesis. Just then, the lights in the house go out, and Akane is deathly scared of the dark, so she clings onto Saito. He tells her it's just a power outage, so he wants to go check the breaker box, but Akane doesn't want to be left alone. She suddenly apologizes for being so stubborn all the time, but Saito tells her she's fine the way she is. Sure, she can be a bit annoying at times and has trouble expressing herself, but overall he is starting to understand that she doesn't mean any harm by it, so he doesn't mind if she acts a little selfish on occasion. Just then, the lights come back on and Himari and Shizzy come back into the living room, but Himari spots Akane holding onto Saito and she thinks it's nice that the two of them are getting along. The next day, Saito is talking to Shizzy at school because he couldn't figure out what caused the power outage yesterday, so he asks her if she had anything to do with it, but Shizzy's hands are clean. Just then, Himari comes up to Saito and asks him if he can tutor her again today, and Saito agrees, so Himari invites Akane as well. However, Akane says she doesn't want to join this time because she has nothing to learn from someone like Saito. But after Himari leaves, she was up to Saito and asks him to please help her study when they get home. That night, Saito teaches Akane a good method to memorize things, and it works really well for her, so she thanks him for sharing his study methods, but this isn't really Saito's method in the first place. He has never had to study, but he came up with a couple study methods as an experiment and tried them out with different people to see how it would work. Although, Akane is the first one to memorize things so easily with it, so it must be because she's naturally smart. With that said, Saito thinks they've studied enough for one night, so he wants to call it a day, but Akane wants to keep studying till morning. Saito knows she is studying to become a doctor, but he still doesn't understand why becoming a doctor is so important to her. She tells him it's none of his business, and Saito admits that she's right, but he still wants to know about Akane's motivations regardless. Since Saito wants to know more about her, Akane agrees to tell him and begins explaining that when she was younger, she had a little sister who was very sick. Her sister could hardly get out of bed, and Akane's parents had to work day in and day out to cover her hospital bills, so they were never around much. Akane's sister would constantly cry out in pain, but all Akane could do is pat her head and watch her suffer until the day she eventually died. She couldn't save her sister back then, but there are other people out there just like her who are suffering right now, so Akane wants to do everything she can to save those people. Saito is glad Akane opened up to him that since she told him about her late sister, she's been feeling gloomy ever since. Saito doesn't know what to do about it, so he goes to Shizzy to ask her for advice on the matter. After telling Shizzy about the situation, she thinks about it for a second and tells him that Akane would probably feel better if she got to do something fun with Saito, like shopping. Saito says he goes shopping with Akane all the time. That's not the kind of shopping Shizzy was talking about. Even though Akane probably won't admit it, Shizzy figured out that she's into a lot of girly stuff, so inviting her to go shopping for sweets or something stylish would be more appropriate. And Shizzy knows the perfect place, since there's a festival in town with all sorts of sweets from around the world. That same day, Saito goes up to Akane while she's making dinner and asks her if she wants to go out with him on their next day off. Akane is so shocked that she accidentally burns the food, but she agrees to the date with Saito, and the next day she goes to talk to her grandma about it. Her grandma is so excited that Saito and Akane are finally getting along that she could die with no regrets right now. But before that, she has to prepare Akane for the date, so she brings her to a hidden closet full of clothes she had been gathering for the day Akane falls in love, but Akane denies being in love with Saito. The day of the date finally arrives, and when Saito sees Akane, he is stunned for a moment because she looks really lovely in that dress. They head out into town and Saito suggests that they go to a cat cafe first since he knows how much Akane loves kitties, but Akane immediately says they can't go there. She's come here before and let's just say she went a little overboard, so she's banned from that cafe for life, but she still really wants to go in. Since the cafe isn't an option, Saito takes Akane to a karaoke room, but Akane starts freaking out because she thinks Saito is going to try something now that they are alone. Saito reminds her that they literally sleep in the same bed every night, so if he was going to try something, he would have done it a long time ago. Akane picks out a song for them to sing, and they actually had a lot of fun singing together, and afterwards, Saito takes her to a lemonade store that he thinks she'll like. Akane gets a strawberry lemonade, and Saito was right because she really does love it. She has had a lot of fun today, but she's curious why Saito asked her out in the first place, since he always does things for a reason. Saito admits that he was trying to make her feel better, because he made her remember some painful memories, and Akane is surprised since that was awfully considerate of him. In return, she says Saito can pick a place he wants to go to next, and she'll tag along with him, but she soon regrets those words because Saito takes her to a supplement store. As soon as they walk in, a big buff dude offers Saito a platter of supplements, and he immediately starts scarfing down as many as he can, and he looks like he's really enjoying himself. After Saito bought all the supplements he needed, he and Akane start walking home. But along the way, Akane spots a ring that she really likes in one of the shops. Saito tells her she should get it for herself if she really likes it that much, and Akane wants to, but it's too expensive for her to afford. Saito takes a look at the price and it really is expensive, but Akane says she'll just have to wait until she starts working and can afford to buy it for herself, although by then someone else would probably have bought the ring. They continue walking home, and Akane thanks Saito for asking her out today because she really does feel a lot better. The story continues. We see Akane's good mood doesn't last forever, because the next day she's back to complaining about every little thing Saito does. Saito wishes the two of them could get along for more than a day, but then he recalls that Akane really wanted the ring she saw yesterday, so he comes up with an idea. At school, Saito asks Shizzy if it's okay for him to come to her house today. Shizzy asks him if there's a special reason for it, but Saito just wants to hang out with her since they haven't spent much time together recently. Shizzy would love to have him come over, so she calls for a ride, and a few minutes later her limo pulls up outside. Saito has had bad times in this limo, so he asks Rui to drive carefully, but she only knows how to go fast or faster. After a heart-pumping ride, they eventually arrive at Shizzy's mansion and head up to her room. Shizzy immediately starts changing her clothes, but Saito tells her to stop and go change somewhere else. However, Shizzy doesn't see a problem with changing in front of Saito, and she prefers it when he helps her change anyway, so Saito has no choice. After Saito has gotten Shizzy dressed, she asks him what game he wants to play, but he doesn't have anything special in mind, so Shizzy suggests they play vampires. The game basically means Shizzy has to try to climb on top of Saito and suck him dry, but in the middle of the game, Saito's aunt walks in. She loves Saito just as much as Shizzy does, so she welcomes him to have dinner with them and spend the night. However, Saito says he actually has to get home soon since Akane will be waiting for him. But while he's here, he asks his aunt if she could let him help out at her company since he's looking for a part-time job. She's a little confused by his requests, since if Saito needs money, he could just ask his grandpa for it. But Saito doesn't want to owe grandpa any favors, plus, he needs to earn the money on his own. His aunt asks him what he needs the money for, so Saito tells her he's planning to buy a gift with it, and both Shizzy and her mother realize who the present is for. Shizzy feels hurt that Saito would use playing with her as a pretext to talk to her mother, but Saito says he really did want to play with her. That aside, Shizzy's mother doesn't think it's fitting for Saito to be getting a part-time job when he is the heir to the Hojo family. It's bad enough that he was already forced to marry a random girl. Saito gets the feeling that Shizzy's mother is against his and Akane's marriage, and she doesn't deny it because she was hoping to have Saito marry Shizzy at some point. That aside, she does have a job for Saito to do. She tells him that the localization department needs some help translating their software. The code is written in an obscure language that no one has been able to translate, but if it's Saito, she assumes he could master in 3 days. However, Saito says he can do it in just one night. That night, Saito gets ready to begin learning the language, so he starts flipping through pages rapidly and memorizing the code. Akane suddenly bursts through the door because she can't believe Saito is actually studying for once, but Saito says he's just trying to learn a language, and after a few more minutes of page flipping, he says he's done memorizing it. Now all he needs to do is get a good night's sleep, so the memory sticks. Akane is really impressed and says she wishes she had Saito inside her, but that was a poor choice of words, so she gets embarrassed and clarifies that she meant she wants to have his brain. Anyway, she asks why he's learning a new language in the first place, but Saito doesn't want to tell her about his job, so he just says it's none of her business. The next day, Saito leaves school with Shizzy and heads to her house to begin working, but Shizzy is sitting in his lap, so it's a little hard to concentrate. Shizzy refuses to get up from his lap and randomly bites his neck, so Saito asks if she's upset about him wanting to buy a present for Akane. Shizzy says that's not the issue because she understands that giving Akane a gift will make Saito's life with her easier. But ever since Saito got married, he hasn't had time to play with her and she gets lonely sometimes. Saito apologizes, but Shizzy says it's not his fault. She understands that he has had a lot of work on his plate lately, but she doesn't have a request to make just this once. She wants Saito to stay in bed with her until she falls asleep. Later that night, Saito finally returns home. He's confronted by Akane, who has been waiting for him to come back. She asks where he was at this time of night, so he tells her he just had a couple errands to run and it's none of her business. He then walks past her to get ready for bed, but as he does this, Akane smells the scent of a girl on Saito's body. She decides to go talk to her grandma about this the next day and tells her that lately Saito has been coming home late and he's not eating dinner with her. Akane's grandma points out that Saito is pretty handsome, so he's probably popular with other girls. Akane admits that there's one girl who has a crush on Saito, but their friends or Saito were spending time with her, she would have mentioned it. Grandma realizes Akane is really worried that Saito might not like her, but she has a hard time expressing her feelings, so she gives her a little advice. Others may lie to you, but life is too short for you to lie to yourself. The next day at school, Himari comes crying to Akane because she asked Saito out again, and he rejected her yet again, so Akane starts comforting her. But just then, Shizzy walks past Akane, and Akane realizes that Shizzy has the same scent as the one that was on Saito last night. That evening, Saito is out late yet again, so Akane is left to eat dinner by herself. She tries convincing herself that she doesn't care that Saito isn't here, but then she remembers what her grandma said about being honest with herself, so she admits that she wants Saito around and picks up her phone to call him. However, she's just now realizing that she never got Saito's contact information, so she's going to have to get creative if she wants to contact him. She pulls out a phone book and looks up the number for Shizzy's house. The maid answers the phone, so Akane asks her if Saito happens to be there, and Rui confirms that Saito is indeed there, but just then, the phone is handed off to Shizzy's mother. Akane wasn't expecting to have to talk to her, so she's a little flustered. But then Shizzy's mother tells her that Saito has his hands full at the moment, so he won't be able to speak with her. Akane tries to explain that she only needs to talk to him for a second, but Shizzy's mother absolutely forbids it. He is busy with work, so she doesn't want him to be disturbed, and besides, their whole marriage is a sham anyway, so she doesn't understand why Akane is so concerned about what Saito is doing. She then hangs up on Akane. Later that same night, Saito finishes his work and meets with Shizzy's mother before he leaves. She already got a report from the team that they've received the translation from Saito, and normally she would need to cross-check the project to make sure there are no mistakes. But Saito never makes mistakes, so she just hands him his money. And while he's still here, she asks Saito why he didn't tell Akane that he was working here, but he just didn't want to ruin the surprise. Since his work is done, Rui gives Saito a ride to the jewelry store so he can buy the ring, but when he finally gets home, he is faced with the furious Akane. She's mad that Saito has been spending so much time at Shizzy's house and says if he likes her so much, then he should have married her instead. Saito can tell that Akane is mad, so he clarifies that he and Shizzy may be close, but that doesn't mean they are dating. However, that doesn't seem to make her feel any better, so she's about to storm off, but before she does, Saito grabs her and pulls out the ring he bought. Akane realizes it's the same one she saw in the jewelry store a few days ago, and Saito explains that he had been doing some translation work for Shizu's mother so he could afford the ring, which is why he was always out so late. She starts getting really flustered over the fact that Saito just gave her a ring, so he tells her this is a peace offering and from now on he hopes the two of them can get along with each other as much as possible. Akane remains silent and runs out of the room, so Saito thinks he might have creeped her out by gifting her a ring, but then she comes back out and tells him she really appreciates his gift. The next morning, Saito wakes up to find Akane sitting in bed, admiring the ring he gave her, and she looks really happy. She asks him if he's going to be out late again tonight, but Saito says he's done with his work, so Akane joyfully says she'll make him a nice dinner tonight. Throughout the day, she keeps admiring the ring every chance she gets, and by dinner time she has prepared a wonderful steak dinner because it's Sato's favorite, but she went a little overboard on the meal prep here. However, Saito forces himself to eat every bite because he doesn't want to turn down Akane's kind gesture. The next day, as they walk to class, Saito is still feeling sick from all the steak he ate last night, but then he notices that Akane is still wearing her ring. He grabs her hand and pulls her away before anyone sees it. Akane has no idea why Saito suddenly dragged her away, so Saito points out that Akane has her ring on, and while he's glad she likes it, they can't let their classmates see it and start asking questions. Akane says she understands, so she'll put the ring in her pouch for now and only wear it at home. However, after returning home, she is hit with a horrible realization: she lost the ring. Akane frantically searches through her bag, but it's not in there, so she goes outside to retrace her steps in hopes of finding it. Unfortunately, even after walking all the way back to school, Akane still hasn't found it, and she's mortified that she somehow lost a precious gift from Saito after just one day. She briefly considers getting a sketchy modeling job to pay for a new ring, but even if she did buy a new one, it wouldn't be the same. The ring was a symbol of Sato's love for her, so no matter what, she has to find the original ring. The next day, Akane tries searching the grocery store to see if she might find the ring there, but she had no such luck, so she sits down on a park bench to cry about it for a minute. Shizu soon shows up, and it doesn't take her long to figure out that she lost the ring Saito bought for her. Akane panics because she doesn't want Saito to find out she lost it, but Shizu tells her she doesn't have to worry because she's going to help her find it. She and Shizu proceed to search the entire school for it, but by nightfall, they still haven't found it yet. Akane apologizes for keeping Shizu out so late and tells her she can go home now, but she's going to keep looking on her own for a little while longer. Shizu tells her she doesn't have to carry the burden alone, but Akane says it was her fault the ring got lost in the first place, so she needs to be the one to find it, no matter how long it takes her. Shizu suggests that Akane should ask Saito for help looking for it, since he's really reliable, and he could probably figure out where it is with his photographic memory, but Akane absolutely refuses to get Saito involved. Meanwhile, Saito is back at home, wondering why Akane is out so late at night today. Just then, someone walks in through the front door, so Saito gets up expecting to see Akane, but it's actually Shizu. Shizu came here because she heard that Akane made curry for dinner tonight. She also tells Saito that Akane won't be coming back for a while. But when Saito asks what's going on, she tells him she can't talk about it because Akane made her promise to keep it a secret, and Shizu doesn't break promises, so if Saito wants to figure out what's bothering Akane, he's going to have to do it the old-fashioned way and stalk her a little. Saito takes Shizu's advice, so the next day after school, he follows Akane as she walks around town searching for something. And now that he thinks about it, he realizes that she hasn't been wearing her ring for the past few days, so he figures out what's going on. He later finds Akane crying under a bridge because she can't find the ring, so he walks up behind her and says he appreciates her trying so hard to find it, but they can always buy another one, so there's no need for Akane to stress herself out so much. However, Akane still insists that she needs to find the ring because it was the first real thing she got from Saito. Saito only married her because he was forced to, but he bought that ring for her because he wanted to give her a gift. It's a symbol of his love and shows that he actually cares about Akane, so even if she spends the rest of her life looking for it, she has to get it back. Saito finally understands why she's been so desperate to find the ring, and if it's really that important to her, then he offers to help her look for it. On the day Akane lost the ring, she and Saito walked home after school together, and Saito remembers every single stop they made along the way. After looking through his memories, he remembers seeing Akane open her bag a total of 4 times that day, and in this very spot, she pulled out her handkerchief, which is probably when she lost the ring. And from this angle, it must have ended up falling into the storm drain, so Saito takes the cover off and reaches into the drain before pulling up the pouch Akane kept her ring in. Akane can't believe Saito was actually able to find it, so she hugs him and swears she will never lose her ring again. At the same time, it looks like a new girl related to the Hojo is about to fly into Japan for a visit, and she isn't happy about Sato's marriage, so she plans to steal him away. The story continues. We see in the next morning, as Saito is sitting on a bench at school, he is greeted by Meiho, but he has never spoken to her before, so he asks her, "Who are you and what do you want?" He looks through his memories and finally recalls seeing the girl one time in the past, but he still has no idea who she is. Meiho is devastated that Saito doesn't know anything about her, but anyway, she tells him she likes him and she wants him, so she asks Saito to be her boyfriend. Saito is beyond shocked by the sudden proposal from an absolute stranger, but Meiho says she's not a stranger because she actually knows a lot about him. Like the fact that he was asked out by Himari, but he turned her down, and the fact that he's currently living with Akane. Saito becomes serious and asks how she could possibly know that, but Meiho dodges the question and asks him if he is willing to go out with her now. Saito still refuses, but then Meiho threatens to tell the entire school that he's married to Akane if he doesn't do what she says. He thinks she is bluffing at first, but then she actually starts yelling out loud, so Saito is forced to cover her mouth and she uses it as an excuse to try kissing Saito. Fortunately, Shizzy comes to the rescue and kicks Meiho away to save Saito. She swears that she will protect Saito no matter what, but she forgets to protect herself because when Meiho comes back, she goes after Shizzy since she's so cute. Meiho asks Saito if she can keep Shizzy for herself, but Saito obviously refuses, so Meiho just attempts to kidnap Shizzy anyway. Luckily, the school bell rings just in time, so Meiho drops Shizzy and excitedly runs off to pack up her stuff. Saito is relieved that he can finally relax, but Shizzy can tell that Meiho is going to be troublesome, so she warns Saito to be careful. Saito later heads back to his class so he can pack his stuff up as well, and as he looks out the window, he can see that Shizzy, Akane, and Himari are already going home, so he can finally spend some alone time today. However, all hope of alone time disappears when Meiho comes looking for him, because every guy in class gets mad at him for having another cute girl, so he's forced to run out of class with Meiho. Once they are alone, Saito asks Meiho what made her decide to ask him out in the first place, so she tells him it was love at first sight. Saito doesn't buy it because he knows he's not handsome enough for that to happen, but Meiho really does think he's good looking. Just then, as she slides down the railing to force Saito to catch her, and when Saito gets upset that she put herself in danger, she tells him life is too short to play it safe all the time, because you never know when you might end up dying. That's why Meiho wanted to confess to Saito as soon as she realized she was in love with him, although Saito can't relate because he has never been in love. Meiho asks him if he's really not in love with Akane, even though they live together, but Saito tells her it's not a matter of whether or not he likes her, he just has no choice. In that case, Meiho asks if he would like to try falling in love with her, and she already has the perfect place for a first date. Saito initially turns her down, but then she asks him if he could at least show her around town since she's still new here, so Saito agrees and they end up going to McDonald's together. While there, Meiho orders this absolutely massive cheeseburger and don't understand how, but she managed to inhale the entire thing in 1 second. Saito is shocked by how much she likes junk food, but he can't really judge her for it because he likes junk food just as much. Meiho says her sister always yells at her whenever she eats junk food, but you know it's annoying. Meiho knows her sister is only looking out for her. Just then, she notices some sauce on Saito's finger, so she decides to seize the opportunity and licks it clean. Saito is concerned that Meiho was willing to lick his fingers with no hesitation, but he's even more concerned about the fact that she just took a picture while doing it, so he demands that she delete it immediately. She refuses, so he chases after her, and when he gets outside, he finds Meiho sitting around the corner of the building out of breath. She can't run away anymore, so Meiho deletes the photo and Saito is satisfied, so he tells her they can go back to the shopping district now. Meiho is surprised that Saito still wants to hang out with her after what she just did, but Saito was never really mad at her. He just can't have her taking pictures of him like that. From what Meiho has been told, Saito and Akane get into fights all the time, but Saito seems like a chill guy, so she assumes he and Akane must just be incompatible. Saito can't deny it since he and Akane don't get along well, so Meiho asks him why he doesn't just break up with her, but that's not really an option for him. Later that evening, Saito is done showing Meiho around town, so he tells her he's going to go home now, but Meiho says she wants to come over to his house and spend the night. Saito immediately refuses, so Meiho resorts to blackmail again and threatens to tell everyone about his and Akane's marriage. Saito is left with no choice but to allow her to come over, so he leads her to his house and rings the doorbell for Akane to let him in. Akane opens the door and she's about to yell at Saito for getting home late, but then she freezes after seeing her little sister on Sato's arm. Saito can't believe that Meiho is really Akane's sister, and Akane is surprised Meiho didn't mention it at all. Anyway, Meiho comes inside and the first thing she does is give her big sister a huge hug because it has been so long since she saw her, but then Meiho starts making the hug weird, so Akane has to put her off. Saito has several questions here, like for one, he thought Akane's sister was dead. Akane doesn't understand why he would think that because she never said anything about Meiho dying. All she said was that she couldn't see her sister any more better place, and it was true because Meiho has been traveling the world, so it has been a long time since she last came back to Japan. And now that she's here, she wants to inspect Saito and Akane's married life. She heads straight for the bedroom, and when she sees the double bed, she asks Akane if she and Saito sleep together every night. Akane says they do, so Meiho thinks that must mean Akane and Saito have done the deed, because there's no way two people who aren't siblings sleep together and nothing happens between them. Akane assures her that she has never done that kind of thing with Saito before. Meiho is relieved to hear that, but she still wants to make sure no funny business happens, so she says she wants to spend the night here. She asks Akane if she can sleep over for the night, and Akane is more than happy to accommodate her, so she tells Meiho she can stay for as long as she likes. To celebrate Meiho's arrival, Akane decides to make a pot of porridge for dinner, but Meiho and Saito really don't like the sound of that, especially Meiho. When she was little, Akane would always force her to eat porridge whenever she got sick, so trauma starts coming back to her whenever she even thinks about porridge. Akane still intends to make porridge though, so she heads to the fridge to get some ingredients, but there she finds Shizzy's body almost completely frozen. After getting Shizzy out of the fridge, Saito checks to make sure she's alright, and Shizzy starts asking him to give her mouth to mouth. But if she can talk, then Saito says she must be fine. Just then, Meiho comes running up and offers to give Shizzy mouth to mouth instead, but Shizzy jumps back in the fridge to get away from her and then hides behind Saito. Meiho begs Saito to please let her have Shizzy, but he'd never give up his beloved little sister. Meiho points out that since Saito is married Akane that makes her his little sister-in-law, but Shizzy refuses to let her title be stolen, so she challenges Meiho to a little sister duel. Saito has no idea what a little sister duel is supposed to be, but before he could figure out what's going on, Meiho has already gotten behind him and starts giving him this step-bro experience. But Sato's not into that, so he gives her a score of 0. Shizzy then steps up to show Meiho how to act like a real little sister, so she falls to the ground and pretends to hurt, activating all of Sato's big brother neurons and compelling him to pick her up. It's pretty clear that Shizzy won the contest, but Akane says she still thinks Meiho is the best little sister in the world. Akane and Meiho head into Akane's room so they can chat in private, and Akane asks her why Meiho didn't tell her she was coming to Japan. Meiho says she just wanted to surprise Akane, and Akane was definitely surprised, especially because Meiho showed up clinging onto Sato's arm. Speaking of Saito, Meiho says she has a proposition for Akane. She thinks it would be better if she marries Saito instead of Akane. She knows this whole thing started because their grandma and Sato's grandpa wanted to see what a youthful romance would look like through their grandkids, so there's no reason Meiho can't take Akane's place. Plus, she's sure she could convince their grandma to fund Akane's education even if she isn't married to Saito. Akane tries saying that the plan would never work because Meiho couldn't handle a guy like Saito. He's arrogant, egocentric, and thinks he is great at everything, which he is, but that's not the point. Meiho doesn't see that as a problem, since she's sure she could get along great with Saito. Plus, Meiho has a lot of things in common with Saito, like her love for junk food and video games, while Akane absolutely hates those things. Akane asks if Meiho is really okay with this, since it would be much better to marry someone she actually loves, but Meiho says she really likes Saito. Sure, she doesn't know much about him yet, but he's hot, and that's enough for Meiho. She then shows Akane the picture she took earlier that day to prove how close she and Saito are, so she surely would get along as a married couple. Meiho then gets up to go spend some time with Saito, and Akane doesn't know how to feel about this. Meanwhile, Saito is taking a bath when Meiho suddenly enters and says she wants to bathe with him. Saito tells her to get out, but Meiho doesn't listen and gets in the bath anyway. She then asks Saito if he'd be fine with marrying her. The only thing their grandparents care about is their grandkids getting married to each other, so it would be fine if Meiho became his wife instead. She tells him she's very committed and she'd let him do anything he wants with her. Saito has to muster a lot of willpower to resist the temptation, so he tells her he will have to think about it, but Meiho makes it clear that she isn't joking about this. After Saito finishes his bath, he heads to the bedroom and he looks completely exhausted. Akane asks what's wrong, so he tells her that Meiho is so energetic that it's draining to be around her. Akane understands what he means, but she's glad to see Meiho in such high spirits because when she was a kid, she was always sick and stuck in the hospital. So she might be a little bratty at times, but Akane still wants to give her as much as she can to make her happy. Saito is about to go to sleep, but before he does, Akane says there's something she wants to ask him. She was wondering if Saito wants to break up with her. Saito immediately gets up and questions why she would ask such a thing, but Akane doesn't know how to respond. The story continues. We see everyone ends up going to an amusement park together as part of a homecoming party for Meiho, but Himari can immediately tell that something's not right, so she asks Meiho what her relationship with Saito is. Meiho says she is currently trying to win over Saito's heart, but that makes her Himari's rival, and Himari isn't going to let someone steal Saito away from her, so the two start fighting over him, and Saito just ignores them so he can head for the first ride. The group goes on all sorts of rides and has fun together, but when it comes to the roller coaster, Akane gets so scared that she passes out cold until the ride is over. She tries to pretend that rides like this don't scare her, but when they go on the Ferris wheel next, she's shaking so much that Saito has to ask if she's okay. Akane finally admits that she's terrified of all the amusement park rides and can't stand heights like this, but if she hates it so much, Saito asks why she agreed to come here in the first place. Akane tells him she just wanted to make Meiho happy because she's always loved going to stuff like parks and festivals and big groups. She was practically always bedridden when she was younger, so she's probably trying to make up for lost time, which is why Akane wants to do everything she can to make Meiho's day as fun as possible. Saito thinks it's sweet that Akane is facing her fears for the sake of Meiho, so he asks her if she wants to hold hands until they get back to the ground. Akane gets flustered and asks Saito if he's trying to make a move on her, but he just figured that holding hands might help calm her down a little. And when he grabs Akane's hand, she does stop shaking, so she decides to hold his hand for a little bit longer. However, no amount of hand-holding could have stopped Akane from freaking out of the haunted house, so Himari has to wait outside with her while she calms down. Saito and Meiho don't seem to have a problem with it though, and Meiho is particularly enjoying how realistic everything is. But Saito reminds her that the point of a haunted house is to get scared, so why come here if she doesn't think it's scary? Meiho tells him she just really enjoys watching other people freak out. All of a sudden, Meiho falls to the ground, so Saito asks her if something is wrong. She tells Saito that she just got a little too excited and got tired, so she can't walk right now. She asks Saito to carry her outside, so Saito does, and lays her down on a park bench so she can catch her breath. He asks Meiho if there's any medication she needs to take, or if he needs to go get Akane. But the last thing Meiho wants is for Akane to start worrying about her again, so she gets up and tells Saito she was just faking it. Saito can't believe Meiho would fake something like this and yells at her for it because you shouldn't joke about life or death situations. She apologizes, but she says she really is fine, and to prove it, she starts spinning around, but that just makes her dizzy. That evening, after Saito is done getting ready for bed, he lays down to go to sleep, but to his surprise, the person next to him isn't Akane, it's Meiho, and she's on top of him now. This might be an awkward time to bring this up, but Saito asks Meiho if she recalls being at one of his grandpa's parties a while back. Right around when he graduated elementary school, Saito remembers going to a party that his grandpa was hosting, and there was this one girl that he spent the whole night talking to, but he never managed to get her name. The girl looked exactly like Meiho, so Saito wants to confirm if it really was her back then. Meiho tells him the girl was her, and she's glad that Saito still remembers her after all this time, but now that that's out of the way, she wants to get down to business and starts unbuttoning Saito's shirt. Saito tells her they should at least get to know each other before this kind of stuff, but Meiho says it's fine because she's in love with Saito anyway. But Saito doesn't know what she's talking about because he can clearly tell that Meiho hates his guts for some reason. Meiho tries to deny it, but no matter how much she keeps saying she loves him, none of her words hold any weight, so Saito knows she's lying. Meiho eventually admits that she really does hate Saito, but that doesn't matter, she still wants to at least kiss him. Just then, Akane walks into the bedroom and finds Meiho on top of Saito, and no amount of explaining from Saito could convince her that nothing happened here, so Akane yells that she hates both of them and kicks them out of the house. Meiho still isn't taking this seriously and asks Saito if they should camp out together for the night. Saito tells her he's just going to walk her back to her house, but Meiho asks where he's going to stay for the night. Saito could probably head over to Shizu's house for the night, but he doesn't want to bother her, so he says he will just stay at a hotel, and as soon as he says this, Meiho asks to tag along. Saito doesn't want to spend the night in the same room as her, so as soon as he arrives at the hotel and gets his room key, he runs inside and locks the door behind him. Maho starts banging on the door and trying to convince him to let her in, but Saito is already dressed for bed, so he tells her to just go back to her house already. But then Maho threatens to break the door down with the fire extinguisher she just found, so Saito is forced to let her in. After wrestling the fire extinguisher out of Maho's hands, Saito ends up pinning her in the bed to stop her from causing any more trouble and says he's kicking her out, but then Maho starts crying. At first, Saito thinks she's just faking it, but Maho is genuinely in tears because she thinks Saito hates her now, just like Akane. Saito asks if Maho is bothered by what Akane said earlier, and of course she is. In all the years Maho has spent with Akane, she never really got mad when Maho would pull pranks like this, so for Akane did say she hates Maho and kick her out, it must mean she'll never talk to Maho again. Maho apologizes for causing Saito so much trouble and offers to make it up to him with her body, but Saito still refuses. After pushing her off him, Saito tells her he's willing to let her stay for the night, but she has to quit trying to seduce him. In that case, Maho asks him if he can tuck her in and pat her head until she gets to sleep, and Saito does the same for Shizzy all the time, so he agrees and the two goes sleep. However, the next morning, Saito notices that something is wrong with Maho. She's gasping for air and feels cold, so Saito asks her if she's alright. Maho tells him that she didn't take her usual medication last night, so she isn't feeling too good. Saito asks why Maho didn't take her pills, but she didn't have a chance to grab them when Akane kicked her out of the house last night. She thought she could manage one night without them, but it looks like she was wrong. Saito says he's going to call an ambulance for her, but Maho asks him to stop because if he calls an ambulance, then Akane will find out and she doesn't want her to worry. She tells him it's not that serious because stuff like this happens to her all the time, so Saito agrees not to call an ambulance. But he still thinks she should go to the hospital, so he carries her outside and waits for a cab to arrive so he can take her there. When they arrive at the hospital, Maho's condition turns out to be a lot worse than she thought, so she has to stay in the hospital for a while. The hospital has already called her parents, and Saito thinks it'll be awkward if he's still here when they arrive, so he's about to leave, but before he goes, Maho pleads with him not to tell Akane about this. Saito asks why, since he's sure Akane would want to visit Maho here, but that's exactly why Maho doesn't want her to know. Akane already had to sacrifice a lot to take care of Maho when they were younger, so she doesn't want to cause her any more trouble. Saito understands, so he promises not to tell Akane, and Maho apologizes to him for all the trouble she's caused. Outside, Saito calls Shizzy to ask her if it's alright for him to stay over for a while since he still can't go home yet. Shizzy asks if he had a fight with Akane, and Saito says it's pretty serious, so Shizzy offers to come pick him up immediately. That day at school, Akane confronts Saito and asks him where Maho is because she hasn't heard from her since last night. And when she asked her parents, all they told her is that Maho is out traveling. Saito asks why she doesn't believe what her parents said, but that can't be true since Maho would have said goodbye before leaving. On top of that, Maho isn't picking up any of Akane's texts or calls, so she's worried that something might have happened to her, and she is sure Saito might know something about it because he is really close to Maho. Saito tells Akane that he and Maho aren't that close, and class will be starting soon, so he doesn't want to talk about this anymore and heads inside, but Akane was also hoping to ask him when he'd come home. After school that day, Saito went to the hospital to visit Maho and brought her a burger. Maho is grateful for the junk food, but Saito tells her he can't keep bringing stuff like this for her, otherwise he will get in trouble. He asks her why she's traveling the world when her condition is still so poor, so Maho tells him it's because she's afraid. She doesn't know when her condition might worsen or if she might suddenly die one day, so she wants to do all the things she can before it's too late. Plus, Akane doesn't worry about her as much when she's traveling, and even if Maho does get sick abroad, Akane would never have to know. She's caused Akane enough trouble as it is, but Akane loves Maho way too much, so Maho had to start hiding her medical complications from her. Saito finally gets the full picture and understands that Maho was just using herself as bait for Akane's sake. At first, he thought Maho seriously hated him for stealing Akane away from her, but there was a strange lack of hostility in her actions, so it did make sense to him. Maho admits that Saito is right. She had heard that Akane got married to a guy from her class that she hated, and Akane would always get so upset whenever Saito would get better test scores than her. Maho figured that Akane must be really unhappy in her marriage, which is why she wanted to take that burden away from her and offered to marry Saito instead, but maybe what she did was wrong because Akane hates her now. Saito assures her that Akane still cares about her a lot, but if she wants to apologize for what she did, then she had better rest up so she can talk to Akane when she gets better. Maho takes his advice and lays down while Saito holds her hand to comfort her, but she is curious about why Saito is taking such good care of her when he doesn't have to. Saito tells her he just wants to make Akane happy, and she would be sad if Meiho was left all alone in a hospital. After Meiho falls asleep, Saito gets up to leave the room, but he is surprised to find Akane standing there. She immediately runs away and heads straight for the elevator because she can't bear to look Saito in the eye after everything she just heard him say, especially the part about him wanting her to be happy. 1 week later, Meiho is fully recovered, so she meets with Akane to apologize for trying to seduce Saito and explains that she was just doing it because she thought Akane was unhappy being married to him. She tried really hard to get Saito to do it with her, but Saito wouldn't budge, and the closest she got was that one time they took a bath together. But Saito stops Meiho before she can finish that sentence because he doesn't want Akane hearing about that. Anyway, what she's trying to say is that Saito hasn't done anything wrong, so Akane shouldn't be mad at him. Akane understands and says she'll forget about everything that happened between her and Saito, but she asks Meiho to stop trying to marry Saito in her place because she doesn't want Meiho to suffer from being around Saito all the time. However, Meiho says she might have actually fallen in love with Saito, so if Akane doesn't want to stay married to him, she'd still be more than happy to take her place. And for some reason, this makes Akane mad at Saito, so she yells at him for seducing her sister. Akane then storms off into the classroom, and while Meiho is still there, she tells Saito she finally figured out who the girl from that party he mentioned earlier was. Saito is confused since he thought Meiho said she was the girl, but that was a lie, and she says she'll tell him who it really was if he gives her a kiss, but Saito just yells at her to go back to her class. Saito then heads back into his class to talk to Akane, and she says she has something she needs to ask. She wants to know if what he said about wanting her to be happy was true, and Saito is a little flustered, but he admits that he was telling the truth. Akane is glad to hear that, so she asks Saito if he can please just come home already. After all, it would be bad if their grandparents found out he hasn't been home for a week, and Saito agrees to come back today. But the two of them failed to realize that Himari was standing right behind them, so she now knows that Saito and Akane live together. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.